And a good Saturday morning to you. Welcome once again to Health Matters with Dr. Jim Warner of Warner Chiropractic, located at 4855 East State Street in Rockford, Illinois, in the Manhattan Plaza. And he's been there for a long time. We're going to talk today about something I don't know much about, hiatal hernia, but I will know something about it after a few minutes.
Yes, and so will our listeners.
Okay.
A lot of people, Fred, know that they have a hiatal hernia. And if someone has some of these symptoms, they're probably going to say, hey, I think that's what I've got. And people that know that they have this problem will find that they have to change the way they do things. They can't eat large meals. They tend to stay away from going out to eat because it causes problems with their digestive system. So we're going to talk about hiatal hernia, what we can do to help that. And there is a chiropractic solution to hiatal hernias, and you don't have to keep the hiatal hernia.
A hernia is simply a weak spot, isn't it?
Yes. Well, with a hiatal hernia, usually with a hernia, Fred, there's a tear involved, and there might be a muscle bulge. You might get that around your belly button. You might get that into the groin area and such. That's the type of what we call normal inguinal hernia. However, when you're talking about a hiatal hernia, you're talking about a problem with the opening or maybe a tearing in the opening of the diaphragm where the esophagus passes through, or basically the breathing muscle is kind of catching on the tube that the food goes down.
So is that right below the neck area then?
Yes, it's going down kind of right above your stomach. You get that feeling like you swallowed it and it didn't go down all the way.
All right.
And it gets stuck in there, okay? And in reality it does. It actually does get stuck. And the reason is because this diaphragm muscle is either in spasm, that's holding that esophagus or that food tube shut, or there's an opening there and part of the stomach actually goes back into the area around the esophagus so that the food doesn't pass through well.
So a person would know if they had that problem because of the pain involved.
Well, yes, Fred. People that have hiatal hernias a lot of times will have to vomit after they eat. They'll have acid reflux, indigestion. And quite frequently, Fred, these people think they're getting a heart attack.
Because of the pain?
Yeah, and a lot of times they get it right in that area by the heart because
Sure.
It's just above the stomach area. So they think they're getting a heart attack, and they go to the hospital, and then they find out that, no, there's nothing wrong with your heart, but you have a hiatal hernia.
Well, do they take an x-ray, or how do they diagnose that problem?
That's interesting. They do take x-rays. They take something called a barium x-ray where they swallow a radiopaque substance. In other words, something that would show up really white on an x-ray. And about 60% of the time, it can diagnose a hiatal hernia. Not 100%, about 60% of the time. And then interestingly, Fred, if you look at it another way, 40% of people that do show a hiatal hernia on x-ray have no symptoms.
Wow.
So it's not very accurate, basically. 60% of the time it is, but even 40% of the time it tells you got a problem when you don't.
Okay, so they're in the hospital. That's been diagnosed. What do they do about it as far as a medical doctor goes?
Okay, here's one of the things that they do. They'll say eat smaller portions.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, eat smaller portions. Sleep with your head raised on your bed. Maybe put some books under the head portion of that. Maybe avoid coffee, tea, spices. They take a lot of antacids because there's a lot of times a regurgitating of acid from the stomach into the esophagus. So they'll treat it that way. Occasionally there'll be surgical intervention too to try to close that hole off or so that there's more. You don't have that problem. But chiropractically speaking, Fred, there's a better way to do that. And we've found through chiropractic that it's caused by maybe the ribs being torqued or your rib cage isn't in proper alignment, twisted. Diaphragm spasm, which frequently goes with that, or the breathing muscle. That goes into spasm. And if you can relax that breathing muscle, then you won't have that catching on that esophagus. And so a lot of times when people have a hiatal hernia attack, they can't breathe well either. And it's all chest breathing. It's not stomach breathing, which is normal. It's chest breathing. A lot of times people get this, Fred, from lifting or maybe they're reaching over something. What I find is when people reach over a couch or a stool or something and it presses up against their diaphragm and they go to pick something up, then they get done and then they're going, oh, I feel something in my stomach. And then when they eat something, it doesn't go down all the way.
So in some cases, a hernia usually designates that something is weak, but if you're torqued or twisted wrong, you'd have that pressure against that part of your body. Would that actually be considered a hernia?
Yes, it is. And actually, sometimes it takes a while for that to heal. Once you chiropractically put things back in place where they're supposed to, it may take up to 3 months or so for that to heal into a normal position. However, normally we find that it gets well much quicker. So how do we know chiropractically, and how do we fix something like that? That's probably the next question. Well, when a person has these symptoms, first of all, we want to rule off that it's not a heart attack. We don't want people to have a heart attack and then treat them for a hiatal hernia. So once we make sure it's not the heart, then we'll do some different testing using what we call applied kinesiology. We'll push in certain directions and see if that brings on more of the symptoms. And if it does, then we treat in an opposite direction. We will test the ribs. We'll see if they're torqued. And if they are, then we will adjust the rib cage into a normal position. We'll check the diaphragm muscles to see if they're in spasm. We have actual adjustments to the diaphragm that relaxes the diaphragm after you put the ribs back in a proper position.
So the diaphragm has a muscle.
The diaphragm is a muscle.
Okay, it is a muscle.
It is a muscle.
And when you say in spasm, do you mean tightened up?
That's it. Okay. It tightens up, and that's why they can't breathe through the stomach. Mm-hmm. They got to lift their chest when they breathe. It's because that diaphragm's not allowing the lungs to fill. So we do that, and then we'll do an actual chiropractic adjustment to the hiatal hernia itself, or to the contents there of the diaphragm. We'll actually pull that diaphragm down and opening up that area, sliding that esophagus through that diaphragm, and then we'll test it to make sure that it's holding correctly, and if it is, then we'll frequently treat the nerves that go to the diaphragm, and then that person will have instant relief. People that have hiatal hernias, 1 minute, 5 minutes later, there'll be an instant relief. It works that quickly.
It kind of reminds me of some of the other tenets or principles of chiropractic, because when you have a nerve obstruction, then or a pinched nerve, then you have a problem with a particular organ. But if you have that diaphragm tightened up and you're obstructing breathing, you have to get it working again, and once again you're treating not the symptom but the source of the problem.
Yes, we're trying to find the source. And interestingly, Fred, the diaphragm muscle is in the stomach area. Where do you think the nerves to the diaphragm come from in the spine?
Well, somewhere in the spine.
Somewhere in the spine. That's true. You got that right. Actually, it comes from the neck.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so someone can have a neck problem, maybe pinch a nerve in the neck, and it affects the diaphragm. And one of the things that we learned when we were studying anatomy and doing human dissection is C3, 4, and 5 keep the diaphragm alive.
Wow.
And so the third, fourth, and fifth cervical nerve roots send the nerves that go to the diaphragm. So when you're a little fetus developing in your mother, the diaphragm actually grows from the neck and somehow goes down and then sets itself correctly just above the stomach. It actually migrates down, and the nerves follow it down while you're developing. And so if you're having problems with the diaphragm, it can often be from the neck.
And, of course, you have to have those nerve pathways open for anything to function properly. But it's interesting. It could be a problem with a twisted rib cage, or it could be a problem in the neck. It could be a similar problem, but with a different source.
Absolutely. And so that's why a lot of times when you treat that with antacids, when you treat it with certain things, avoiding certain things, you're not really getting to the cause of the problem. You might be treating the area of involvement because it bothers the stomach, but you might not be getting to the cause of the problem, and that's why chiropractic treatment works so well for this, where other methods don't.
So when you're treating something like this, what is the most common symptom you see? Is it a person having trouble breathing, or is it pain there?
It's more indigestion, but frequently it's pain there. frequently it's problems with swallowing. It just doesn't go down all the way. And, they may drink water and it gets kind of stuck there. And all of us have maybe had this feeling before, which was maybe from a little spasm there. But people that have this after every single meal, they know what I'm talking about. This is something that responds well, and people out there suffering from that do not have to suffer from that.
And, of course, if you were watching TV, they'd give you a purple pill to try to solve that problem.
That solves everything, doesn't it?
Evidently.
Well, we don't have any purple pills at Warner Chiropractic. If people are looking for purple pills, they're going to have to go somewhere else. But we will do our best to help hiatal hernias.
Well, if a person has a problem like that and it hasn't been diagnosed, I'm sure that you'd be able to help them find if that is the problem.
Yes. First, identify it. Make sure that's what it is. Make sure it's not a heart attack. And then once you know for sure it's a hiatal hernia, then there are things that we can do to help it. Sometimes people, maybe a home treatment that might give a little bit of relief for people that are suffering from this is to take your fingers and go right underneath your rib cage and then push down on that. Maybe bend forward like you're going down to touch your toes, but then take your hands and push against your abdomen right below the rib cage. Push down on that. Sometimes that gives you a little bit of relief. So that'd be something that people that are listening that are suffering from hiatal hernia, until they can get this thing fixed correctly, maybe try that little self-manipulation there. Just try to help that diaphragm.
I know you have a website.
www.warnerchiro.com.
warnerchiro.com, and you can find information there, or you can call the office as well.
You can call us at 815-398-8111.
815-398-8111. Warner Chiropractic in Rockford, Illinois. Thanks for the information, Dr. Jim.
Thank you, and have a wonderful weekend.
That's going to do it today for Health Matters.